Good evening. Welcome, welcome. So maybe I'll start by just sharing a little bit that sometimes at the end of retreats we have a closing circle and people talk about how their experience was. And not all closing circles are exactly the same, but sometimes it's not uncommon for people to share something that happened that was meaningful for them, that was noteworthy, that something they want to take away perhaps with them. And sometimes, not every closing circle, sometimes I say something like, whatever you found here that was meaningful, some new understanding, feeling of peace and ease, or some settledness in the mind and the body, or maybe a connection with somebody else, that might happen if you did a job together or something like this. I often say, give it away. Just give it away. So this idea of maybe as you get in your car to leave the retreat and there's other people in the lane next to you, here, have some peace. Here, have some stillness. Here, have some sense of well-being. Just give it away, like actively doing this. There's something about sometimes when we find things that are meaningful or helpful, we want to hold on to them. Of course we do. Of course we want to hold on to them. But, right, those of us who have been practicing for a while, and certainly the Buddhist teachings are pointing to this idea of clinging, right, leads to dukkha, leads to suffering. And so there can be a way in which, this is so meaningful that I have to hold on to it. But the act of holding on sometimes transforms it from an experience to just an object, to just another concept or memory, and it's no longer a lived experience. For me, this was very powerful. I think I've told this story maybe more than once, that I was sitting a long retreat, and after quite some time on retreat, I needed to go to the doctors. It turned out not to be serious and turned out to be fine, but when your mind is really settled and you've been practicing, I think at that time maybe it had been a few months, that any small little thing turns into something giant. So anyway, so I was off to the doctors, and I'd only been doing walking meditation slowly for a long time, so it was so exciting to be in a car. We were going so fast, 35 miles an hour, wow. But I remember having this idea of okay, I'm coming from this place of, incredible stillness and peace, and I was having a lot of ease, and just giving it away to people in the car, in the other lanes, going the opposite direction or something. And just my heart just starting to overflow. And then showing up I don't remember now if it was an urgent care or just a doctor's office, but there's a lot of suffering in the waiting rooms of medical centers, and just giving it away, okay, here's whatever sense of peace I have here, have it. Here's any sense of well-being or stability. And there was something magical about this. And one thing, of course, is we discover that these aren't commodities. There isn't a limited quantity, of course not. They're unlimited. And giving them away helps them grow, helps them expand. And so there's this movement, this openness, this willingness to open up and maybe share, as opposed to kind of hold on. That is really a big support for practice. And this shows up in so many ways. But what I want to highlight is this practicing generosity that leads to this. I'm using this word generosity, this willingness to give away. Here it was some experience. And maybe I'll back up. Of course, when we come off retreat, for me, I'm often writing down some notes. That was what was really meaningful and helpful for me. And sometimes I'll look back at those notes Maybe I don't always. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't ever remember things that happen that are really meaningful and supportive for us. It's the clinging and oh, I have to hold on to this. This is where we're going to get into trouble. And the opposite of this clinging is this movement of, maybe we would say, sharing or generosity or letting go. And it supports this openness, this spaciousness, this sense of having enough. Undermines a sense of inadequacy or insufficiency, or this sense of lack. This freely giving away turns out to be a tremendous support. And the Buddha pointed to this in some of his teachings, paraphrasing. Maybe some of you have heard this, but the Buddha's, one of his teaching is, if you knew what I know about the power of generosity, you wouldn't let a single meal go by without sharing it. So he's just pointing to this openness. And we might also say this recognition of connection to others, how we impact others, and of course we're impacted by others too. So this, we might say, is a little bit of a paradox. This idea of giving away makes us feel like we have more, because it undoes this feeling of, I have to have more, I have to hold on to this in some kind of way. But I think all of us have this recognition that when we have this feeling of, I don't have enough, then it's really, and it's true, right? I want to say sometimes we don't have enough. Sometimes we don't have enough money, that we find ourselves in a lot of debt, or we find ourselves not being able to take care of some additional responsibilities we find ourselves having, or whatever it might be. So, I mean, it's perfectly legitimate that sometimes there simply isn't enough. I'm pointing to money right now. But if there's a way in which we're primarily concerned with, okay, I gotta get more, then it leads to a sense, it really supports this sense of insufficiency, and there's this gnawing anxiety that goes with that. There's this, that kind of supports the sense of there's not enough. So this can be a kind of a tricky territory, okay, I need to get out of debt, and yet I don't want to feel like everything isn't enough. One way we can look at that, and I'll talk about this in a moment a little bit, is to bring some wisdom to this. Maybe money is one thing, what's in the bank account, what's on the credit card, versus what is there, what do we have enough of? What can we give away? Our attention. So much suffering in the world is about people feeling like they haven't been seen, or haven't been heard, or haven't been met with somebody giving them their full attention. It's quite astounding, actually, if we look at that and notice this. So maybe we can give our attention with care to somebody who comes to talk to us, or even on just small things. The grocery clerk, just to, make eye contact and acknowledge, and if it seems appropriate, say a little, hi, how are you, kind of thing. Instead of, there's a way in which we could just be, just you do your job so I can get out of here as fast as possible, instead of kind of recognizing our common humanity. Or maybe we could be generous with some kindness. Kindness for ourselves and kindness with others. Maybe there's some warm-heartedness, and maybe that takes the form of sending a card, like a physical piece of paper that goes in the mail. Seems like special these days, right? It's like precious things. When I get something in the mail, Now it's, text and email, it seems so easy, but to actually send a card to somebody, it's a sense of uplift, some kindness and some care. So this idea of like generosity and giving, when we talk about it here in the Buddhist centers, and then certainly in this tradition in particular, where we really highlight that everything is offered freely, everything here at IMC, right? Offered freely. Everything at the retreat center, offered freely. All of our retreats offered freely. And then when we want to talk about generosity, sometimes it can feel awkward, but there's a way in which we're maybe perhaps like conflating maybe mainstream ideas of generosity and giving with what I might say the Buddhist ideas. And I want to highlight a few differences here. First of all, I'll say that generosity, often translated as dana, and you hear this language, dana, D-A-N-A. It turns out to be a foundational practice in the Buddhist teachings. It's just this recognition of the openness, of sharing, maybe connecting with others, and in contrast to the opposite of I have to have more. Which again, I want to say sometimes we do need more. I don't want to say that we don't, but it's part of this with ethical behavior, this openness, this willingness to share, whether it's attention or kindness or time or material objects, money or something else, is really foundational to the practice. So it highlights how we are in the world, as opposed to, okay, I just got to get some meditative experience and then I'll be fine. It's really highlighting the way that we impact others and we are impacted by others. So in the list of paramis, some of you might be familiar with this list, it's a list of 10 qualities that are usually described as off of the meditation cushion, so something that is done in one's life. The first is this orientation towards sharing, this orientation towards giving, generosity. It's also often when the Buddha is giving teachings to somebody in these stories and he encounters them, the first teaching he gives them is about generosity. Dana, and then sila, ethical behavior, and then bhavana, this mental cultivation. So just this recognition that generosity so often is just this orientation towards some openness. And it's this orientation that turns out that can have such a big impact on our lives. And this is maybe in contrast to what I might say a mainstream society. The orientation is getting. I gotta get more. Give me more. I gotta attain. I gotta achieve. I gotta have. What can I get? And what can I get away with? And this opposite. It's a society we created. We can choose to participate in that or not in a way that makes sense to us. But there's a real different emphasis on what kind of an orientation to have. And so we might say that also in what I'm going to call mainstream these days, this is what we're doing here at IMC is not so different than mainstream, we might say, but I'm going to say mainstream versus these Buddhist, Theravada Buddhist values. In mainstream, there's often this way in which giving, I'll just use this word, giving, is transactional. You gave me this, I'll give you that. Or, maybe there's a sense, and again, it's a natural thing, but, I had you over for dinner, and I'm kind of expecting that you're going to invite me over for dinner, or that if you're offering me dinner, then I better show up with something that's of value, and I'm not saying that these are bad, I'm just saying there's this, often a transactional, or maybe there's just, the Girl Scout cookies, okay, I'm going to pay this amount of money for the cookies or something that will support the Girl Scouts. So there's this clear expectations, I might say, of reciprocity, or maybe there's this clear expectations of tangible benefits. I'm going to get cookies now that I gave money to this young girl that rang the doorbell, or that is standing in front of the grocery store, as the case may be. So I would say in mainstream society, there's kind of the reciprocity and tangible benefits. But with a Buddhist idea, it's more of an internal experience is the orientate, or is the emphasis, I should say. Whereas this external, okay, what am I going to get? Versus, oh, what is the experience like? Is it supporting greater freedom? Is it supporting greater ease, greater peace in my movement towards trying to find my way through the suffering I have in my life? And also we might say in kind of like mainstream giving, sometimes there's this giving that's done out of a sense of duty or a sense of obligation, a sense of, well, this is what's expected of us. There's this maybe kind of these norms of certain communities, or there's this expectation that you should give, in this particular setting. Whereas in contrast to that, I would say like the Buddhist teachings on generosity is more on this emphasis on cultivating an open heart, cultivating an open mind. And this recognition that the heart and the mind and our behaviors, of course, they're connected and they go all directions. The heart affects, I'm using heart to mean maybe a felt sense, or maybe an intuition or a feeling. I'm using mind to be more like thoughts and concepts. And then behaviors are the things that we actually do. All three of these influence one another, and the influence goes all directions. So, of course, what's in our mind influences our behavior, but our behavior influences our minds and our hearts as well. So this recognition that generosity flows out of this openness of heart and mind, but also the behavior of being generous supports this sense of openness in the heart and mind as well. It's also about cultivating, we might say, this inner disposition of not only openness, but maybe some kindness and some care that often accompanies when there's some generosity, when there's some giving. So there's this, maybe this movement of giving, as I pointed out earlier, also is the opposite of clinging. So it's the cultivation of something that's the opposite of what leads to suffering. It's this cultivation of what leads to greater peace and ease. And sometimes it's this, when we're doing the opposite of something, it highlights its opposite. For example, the feeling some of the openness with generosity really starts to highlight, oh yeah, there's this tightness. When there's this feeling of stinginess, for example, I might say, that's not a very nice word. I don't feel good saying that word. This sense of holding too tightly. Maybe I'll just say that. So just this, maybe I'll say, use different language. That being the generosity supporting the openness, and it highlights the tightness that we can feel in other areas of our life, including when we feel like, no, I can't share my attention or my time or my energy. And I feel like every time I say something like this, I also need to say there are times in our lives when we have a lot of suffering and we don't have the capacity to meet others where they are. There are seasons perhaps when there's a lot of illness or a lot of dukkha in whatever way. So I don't want us to feel obligated, like, oh yeah, okay, I have to give, even though we feel so depleted, even though we are starving for some ease when we're in the midst of difficulties. Having said that, that part of the connection between generosity and some happiness is, we see this happen a lot on big scales. Hurricanes, these terrible hurricanes that were just in the south, North Carolina and Florida, for example. I'm just using this as an example. There's so many terrible things that are happening in the world. That when there's this tragedy and things are, I'll just use this word, awful, horrible, yeah. Sometimes people come together and share what they have with others. Or they help pick up the rubble, or they help literally or metaphorically. And there's this activity of, like, when we're sharing, helping others, that can bring this uplift of the heart, that even though there's this devastation around, perhaps I feel devastated, the act of being generous, of supporting someone else, kind of reminds us, oh yeah, I have something I can give. Energy, time, attention, whatever it is. And there's this uplift of the heart that can happen with that. So sometimes I'm saying, when we're really down and out, maybe we don't have the capacity to be generous. And it might be, if we do have the energy to be generous in some kind of way, might provide some uplift, a little bit of joy, some appreciation, and maybe undermine sometimes we often have this sense of we don't have agency, like we can't do anything, or it's just not enough of anything, and being generous can counteract that. So also there's this way in which I'm going to contrast, like, mainstream idea of generosity versus, like, the Buddhist ideas of generosity, is that kind of in the Buddhist ideas, there's a real emphasis on having some wise discernment in one's generosity. I would say, maybe in contrast, like mainstream requests, or I'll just use this word, requests, they're often relying on, and I don't want to say this is bad, I'm just saying this to highlight how with the Buddhist one is different. In the mainstream, they often are relying on emotional impulses, like like a certain brokenheartedness that can happen when you see a particular photo of, often it's a child, right, that is in distress. There's a lot of research around this, right? Of course. So people have done research, okay, what makes it most likely that somebody will donate? What kind of photos? And they've determined that usually it's just one child is better than more than one. And, there's all kinds of stuff on this. But so they're relying on the heartstrings getting pulled as a way to be generous. Or maybe some social pressure to be generous. Some religious traditions, for example, openly share how much individuals donate. They have it like publicly listed. So-and-so donated this much, so-and-so donated that much. Or some religious traditions say, well, some of our religious tenets are only available to you if you donate enough, or something like this, right? So there's other ways in which mainstream requests for donations are using certain approaches. In contrast, I would say here we're really pointing to wisdom needs to be here. This is an opportunity to cultivate wisdom. This is an opportunity to use wisdom. So this an encouragement to be attentive to one's own needs and limitations. This, okay, what's appropriate for you in your life situation in terms of the amount that you donate? or this encouragement, like, do you feel like inspired or appreciative and want to help see these continue, these teachings continue, or these offerings continue, and some wise discernment, like, is this something that's valuable for me? If so, then what can donate? So less relying on emotional heartstrings, and also this sense of wisdom, but the wisdom also comes with this sense of responsibility of, like, not harming. We don't want to harm ourselves, that we're being generous to a way that is inappropriate for us, for our life. We've all heard these stories of people getting in terrible debt so that they can donate to some organization. And then that organization ends up just dissolving or going away or being a bogus one. It's heartbreaking. Whereas here, there's this, in the Buddhist tradition, there's a real encouragement to practice generosity and wisdom together. And so there could even be a way in which our generosity, like, compounds difficulties. For example, there might be a situation in which we feel like, okay, well, here's one of my coworkers who is doing a lot of complaining, maybe about their boss or their spouse or the government. I mean, there's no end of things that we can complain about. And maybe we feel like, okay, well, I'm going to be generous and really listen to them. But we might start to notice that the more the person is complaining and complaining, the more that they're feeling dejected, and we're feeling dejected, and they're starting to feel even more agitated. And not only that, they did this. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh. And then we're starting to feel like, oh yeah, it really is awful. And starting to feel helpless and hopeless or something like this. So if we just listen, feeling like we're being generous, then maybe they might believe that we're condoning their behavior and thinking that, oh yeah, this is a way to greater peace and freedom. Or maybe they might even think that we are agreeing with everything that they say, and would go to somebody else and say, oh yeah, well, so-and-so agrees with me. Because they didn't say anything when I was complaining about this, that, and the other thing. So just this encouragement to have some sensitivity about, the manner in which we're being generous, and make sure that we're not causing harm to others or to ourselves. And maybe I'll also add, this idea of generosity requires us to be sensitive to what's happening with other people. What is the wise thing to do? Are we just being generous because we feel uncomfortable and we want to stop feeling uncomfortable? Or are we so closed off and concerned with ourselves that we don't even notice when other people could use some help, could use some attention, could use some kindness? So there's this way in which this idea of generosity is used as a foundational teaching, just as this openness of the heart, but also as a way that supports the teachings, of course, but supports our own path towards liberation. It's this way that I've been talking about, this openness of heart and mind, but some of you might be familiar with this teaching that one of the three, sometimes gets called poisons, is greed. This sense of just, I need to have more. This causes so much suffering in the world for us as individuals, and then, just the wider world. And so generosity is an antidote to one of these poisons that shows up in so many ways. And complete freedom is described as the absence of greed, the absence of hatred, and the absence of delusion. So this is like fundamentally pointing directly towards some of this movement towards greater freedom. So maybe I'll say a little bit about something else about this the Buddhist practice of generosity, or this Buddhist emphasis of generosity. is it's also a great way in which we can learn about ourselves. A big part of this practice is some greater self-understanding. How we are in the world, how we show up in the world, as a way to help us find less suffering and more ease. So we might just have this query: what areas of our lives do we feel generous, and what areas do we not feel so generous? Not that it has to be bad or good, but just to understand ourselves, and then maybe to stretch ourselves a little bit. I'm not saying we have to condemn the way that we are, but just an encouragement to find more and more openness. And so an obvious way is like between time and resources. Some people are like, oh, I don't have any extra time, but here you can have some money. Or maybe some people are like, I don't have any money, but I have time to share. Or I don't have so much kindness. I'm cranky and my world is falling apart and I don't have kindness. Or I don't want to give you attention. Or not so much I don't want to give you, like I can't give you attention because I have so much suffering here. And again, we don't have to say it's bad or good. We could just have this recognition, well, how is it for us? And is there a way with this greater understanding of how generosity shows up in our lives? Is there a way that we could have greater freedom if by just maybe stretching a little bit? Because we learned these ways of how we are, how generosity is in the world, most likely from our families, from our societies, our communities that we grew up with. We don't have to make them bad, but can we learn something? And when we look at this, when we look at our practice of generosity, we'll probably notice that we most often have mixed motivations when we're generous. Maybe some of it is this natural wanting to share, and maybe there's a like, well, it's kind of expected of me, or we might say, and I want them to like me, or I want them to appreciate me, or I want them to remember me, or whatever it is. And can that be okay? Because we might say, well, if it's mixed motivations, it's not pure openness, then maybe it's not even worthwhile. What happens is, I would say it always starts with some mixed motivations. And then as we practice both with mindfulness and just spiritual practice in general, our motivations start to get more and more, I might use this word, purified. They start to become more and more generous and open as we're finding more and more ease. It just naturally flows that way. So this idea of giving, and we might say mainstream giving, versus maybe kind of this Buddhist idea of generosity, which turns out to be a foundational practice as it points to this openness, this open-heartedness, open-mindedness. We might even say open-fistedness, maybe. In this way that we show up in the world that leads to greater freedom, less harm, and peace and ease. So thank you. Thank you for your kind attention. And I'll open it up for some comments and questions. Thank you.
I had a couple of thoughts about like the intention behind generosity that have seen this in others, and I look for it in myself if it's kind of an unhealthy, I want to be generous this way and get some recognition for it. To me, I see that as greed, greed for recognition. So not real open generosity. And then the other thing, when you were talking about if you're depleted yourself, maybe it's not the time to be generous. I was thinking, well, maybe that's the time to direct your generosity to yourself.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like this idea of having generosity towards myself. I love that. Some self-care in some kind of way. Yeah, and this is interesting about being generous so that you can have some recognition. I'll say that there is back when I was in corporate America, there is a plaque, I'll say here in the Bay Area, that has my name on it for, my generosity for something. So, but I will also say that whenever I see that or I recall it, it gives me this uplift of the heart. It was something that was meaningful for me, and I don't know, it makes me very happy that I was able to do that. So maybe there was some greed there of recognition. I did like the idea that my name was going to be on this plaque. And I heard this idea years ago from Joseph Goldstein. He's one of the elders in this tradition. And about generosity. And he said that he had started this practice of whenever there was a request for generosity, to just do it. Even though the motivations may be mixed, just to do it, and being wise with regards to one's means. And I started to do this as well. I loved it. It just made me happy, and I also noticed how my motivations were all over the place. But there was also just this recognition of being generous with material goods or with time and attention. It cultivates this movement of maybe of letting go. So I don't know if this addresses your comments. Yeah. Thank you.
So you mentioned that uplift of the heart. And I was thinking about this while you were talking. In my experience, it only comes when it is difficult to be generous. So contributing to organizations like Save the Children or Doctors Without Borders, that's easy, and there is no uplift of the heart in that sort of generosity. Putting myself in a situation that is difficult, talking to someone that I feel uncomfortable, but it's helpful, that has the uplift of the heart. Is that...
So you're saying the uplift of the heart is more if it's difficult to give. Yeah. I see. Mm-hmm. That hasn't been my experience. But I think this is a great thing to explore. Okay, what is the connection there between if it's difficult to give or not to give? Thank you for bringing up that. I don't have an answer. I'm just explaining my experience. Mm-hmm. Seems like your experience is different. I think it's a great thing to explore.
Yeah. I'm contributing to these large organizations because that's the right thing to do, but doesn't do anything for me inside.
Thank you.
So one area where I feel a little tight is I like things to go my way, and especially socially, there's control, and wondering if you have suggestions for working with giving that away, giving agency, allowing for things to go the way that I don't like.
What does it feel like when you said that you feel tight? Can you say a little bit more?
Yeah, it's like, ooh, it would be better if I told them this is my way, the better way to do it.
Yeah. This is such an interesting topic, about controlling others. And of course, Kevin, you probably know, right? We don't get to control. I mean, we think we can, but we don't really control others. What comes to mind is something simple about just being present in the moment. an obvious thing is you like feeling your feet on the ground, because often what happens when we're trying to control others is maybe even you said this, Kevin, is to not feel the discomfort. And so we feel like, okay, well, if they would just stop doing that or start doing that, then I wouldn't have this discomfort. But is there a way that we can just acknowledge, feel our feet on the ground and like, yeah, this is uncomfortable. And that's the truth of the moment, right? And that's the reality of the moment. And can we be with that as best we can? And so often probably what will happen is like, oh yeah, this is uncomfortable. And they really should be doing all this kind of stuff, right? We'll slip right into that. And then can you just come back to, wow, this really is uncomfortable. But what, man, you probably have this experience too, that if we don't control, often things unfold in a way that we don't expect, and maybe they're even better. Like maybe people have different ideas that turn out to be better than the ideas that we have had. So it takes a little maybe trust and confidence in the unfolding of things. And maybe if it's not better, can that be okay too? I wish I had an easy answer for you, Kevin. Just like,
That was good, thank you.
you're welcome. Anybody else have a question or comment? Okay, so may you find some flow of this openness of the heart as you go home this evening and every day thereafter. Thank you. Wishing you well.